When we think about where a narcissist goes during their moments of complete collapse, when the carefully constructed facade finally crumbles, when they've exhausted their supply sources, when consequences they can no longer avoid come crashing down, most people assume they'd turn to their current partner, their most recent romantic interest, or perhaps the person who seems most devoted to them. But that's not typically what happens. Instead, the narcissist's instinct in crisis is to regress. And this regression takes them back to the very beginning, to the origin point of their pathology, the primary caregiver, most often a parent. Now, this might seem counterintuitive at first. After all, if we understand narcissistic pathology as a defensive adaptation to early relational trauma, wouldn't the narcissist avoid the very people who contributed to that trauma? Wouldn't they seek distance from the source of their original wound? But human psychology doesn't work that way. When we're in crisis, when our defenses have failed and we're experiencing psychological collapse, we don't gravitate toward health. We gravitate toward the familiar. And for the narcissist, what's familiar is the original dynamic that taught them how to manage unbearable feelings of worthlessness or inadequacy through the construction of a false self. Let me explain what I mean. The narcissist's relationship with their primary caregiver, let's say their mother, though it could be either parent or both, established the template for how they learned to get their needs met, or more accurately, how they learned to survive when their needs couldn't be met in healthy ways. Perhaps this parent was cold, withholding, impossible to please. The child learned that they had to be exceptional, perfect, beyond reproach to receive even basic acknowledgement. Or perhaps this parent was engulfing, treating the child as an extension of themselves, providing excessive attention when the child performed the role the parent needed, but withdrawing when the child showed authentic needs or feelings. Either way, whether through deprivation or engulfment, the child learned that their authentic self was not acceptable, not safe to show, not sufficient. And they developed a false self, a performed identity designed to extract whatever validation or attention was available from this parent who couldn't offer genuine, unconditional love. Now, fast forward to the narcissist's collapse in adulthood. Everything they've built to avoid feeling that original inadequacy has failed. Their relationship has ended, or their career has imploded, or their reputation has been destroyed, or they've lost the supply sources that were keeping their fragile sense of self inflated. They're facing the very feelings their entire defensive structure was designed to prevent: worthlessness, shame, the terror of being fundamentally defective. And in this moment of profound regression, they don't reach for something new or healthy. They reach for what's archetypal, what's imprinted at the deepest level of their psyche. They return to the parent because that parent holds the original script for how to manage these unbearable feelings. If the parent was withholding, the narcissist returns, seeking to finally earn the approval that was always just out of reach. In their collapsed state, they regress to the child who believes that if they can just be good enough, perform well enough, present the right version of themselves, they'll finally receive the validation they've been seeking their entire life. If the parent was engulfing, the narcissist returns to be subsumed again, to let someone else define their reality, to escape the terrifying responsibility of having a self by merging back into the parent's identity. There's a regressive comfort in this, in letting someone else tell you who you are when your own constructed identity has failed. And here's what's particularly tragic. This parent often still plays the same role they always played. The withholding parent remains withholding, perhaps offering minimal comfort, but still requiring the narcissist to perform, to explain themselves, to justify their worth. The engulfing parent sees the narcissist's crisis as confirmation of what they always knew, that the narcissist needs them, cannot function independently, was always dependent on the parent's guidance and definition. Neither response provides actual healing or growth. But that's not what the narcissist is seeking in their collapse. They're not looking for transformation. They're looking for temporary stabilization, using the only template they know. They're seeking to restore the familiar dynamic, however pathological, because the familiar feels safer than the unknown territory of genuine vulnerability and change. This is why you'll often see adult narcissists, even those who seemed independent and successful, reverting to almost childlike states when they return to their parent during crisis. They're not just seeking practical support. They're unconsciously attempting to return to the developmental moment when their defensive structure was formed, as if by going back to the beginning, they might find a different outcome this time. But of course, they can't. Because the parent hasn't changed, the dynamic hasn't changed, and the narcissist isn't bringing awareness or willingness to heal. They're bringing the same defenses that were formed in relationship with this person in the first place. This creates a kind of tragic circularity. The narcissist flees from the consequences of their adult pathology back to the source of that pathology, seeking comfort from the very person whose relational patterns helped create the narcissist's disordered way of being. It's like trying to treat a wound by returning to the place where you were originally injured. And often, after a period of this regressive dependence, the narcissist will rebuild their false self using the same old template, restabilize their defenses, and return to their adult life with the same patterns intact. The collapse hasn't led to transformation because they sought refuge in the familiar pathology rather than risking the unknown territory of genuine healing. In crisis, the narcissist doesn't run to where they might heal. They run to where the wound first learned to hide itself. But there's another pattern that emerges during the narcissist's collapse, one that's particularly painful for those who've done the difficult work of leaving. Because sometimes, paradoxically, the narcissist returns to the very person whose boundaries precipitated their collapse, the super empath who finally had enough and walked away. And I want to be very clear about what's happening here because it can be devastatingly confusing for the empath who receives this contact. The narcissist appears at their doorstep, metaphorically or literally, in a state of apparent devastation. They're vulnerable in ways the empath has never seen. They're admitting fault, expressing regret, showing the kind of emotional rawness that the empath spent years hopping to witness. And the empath's first thought is often, finally. They've hit bottom. They're finally ready to change. This is the breakthrough I always believed was possible. But that's almost never what's actually happening. Let me explain the psychology behind why the narcissist returns specifically to the super empath during collapse. It's not because they've suddenly recognized the value of what they lost. It's not because they've done any genuine self-reflection and realized the empath was the best thing in their life. It's because the super empath represents something very specific in the narcissist's psychological economy. The last time they felt truly regulated. Remember what we discussed earlier about how super empaths function for narcissists. They provide extraordinarily high-quality supply, yes, but more than that, they serve as emotional regulators for the narcissist's internal chaos. The super empath's presence created a kind of stability, a sense of being held together, that the narcissist has been unable to replicate with anyone else. So when everything falls apart, when other supply sources have dried up, when consequences have accumulated, when the narcissist is experiencing the full force of their internal fragmentation, they remember that with the super empath, they felt less chaotic, they felt more coherent. The empath's extraordinary capacity to hold space, to remain calm in the face of intensity, to provide consistent presence. All of this created an experience of being contained that the narcissist desperately needs when they're falling apart. But here's the crucial distinction. The narcissist isn't returning because they want to repair the relationship. They're returning because they need emergency regulation. They need someone to perform the function of holding them together while they restabilize their defenses. They're seeking a temporary, airy life raft, not a genuine reconciliation. And this is why the super empath is often the target rather than more recent partners or other people in the narcissist's life. Because those people either don't have the capacity to provide this level of emotional regulation, or they've already been depleted and discarded. The super empath, precisely because they had the strength to leave, has demonstrated that they still have resources, still have capacity, still have the depth to potentially help. The narcissist's unconscious calculus goes something like this. This person survived my worst behavior. This person was strong enough to leave. Therefore, this person is strong enough to save me now. There's also another layer to this dynamic that's particularly insidious. The narcissist often experiences the super empath's departure as the ultimate rejection, not because they genuinely valued the relationship, but because it was the first time someone saw them completely and still chose to leave. This created a narcissistic injury, a wound to their grandiose self-image. And now, in their collapse, there's an unconscious desire to reverse that rejection. If they can get the super empath to take them back, to rescue them, to provide comfort and support during this crisis, it would undo the injury. It would prove that the empath's departure wasn't a final judgment after all, that the narcissist is still capable of being chosen even after everything they've done. So the return to the super empath serves multiple functions simultaneously: emergency emotional regulation, an attempt to undo narcissistic injury, and often a test to see if the empath's boundaries were real or if they can still be manipulated. And here's where it becomes dangerous for the empath, because the narcissist often arrives in a state of such apparent vulnerability, such seeming self-awareness, that it activates everything the empath has been working to establish boundaries against. The empath sees someone in genuine pain, showing real emotion, appearing to finally understand what they've lost. The narcissist might say things the empath waited years to hear. "I was wrong. I see how I hurt you. You were the only one who really understood me. I've never connected with anyone the way I connected with you. I'm falling apart without you." And all of this might even be subjectively true for the narcissist in that moment. But it's true in the way a drowning person's panic is true. It's a survival response, not a transformation. The narcissist is reaching for anything that will keep them afloat. And the super empath represents the strongest flotation device they know. But what happens if the empath responds to this crisis, if they provide the comfort and support the narcissist is seeking? Almost invariably, once the narcissist restabilizes, once they've used the empath's presence to regulate their nervous system, once they've rebuilt their defenses, once they've found new supply sources, the old patterns return. The vulnerability disappears. The apparent self-awareness evaporates. The narcissist might even begin to resent the empath for having witnessed them in such a collapsed state. And often, the treatment becomes worse than before, because now the narcissist associates the empath with their own shame and fragility. This is why therapists who work with survivors of narcissistic abuse emphasize the importance of maintaining no contact, even when the narcissist returns in crisis. Not because the empath should be vindictive or cruel, but because the empath's compassion during the narcissist's collapse becomes another form of participation in a pathological dynamic that will inevitably cause further harm. The narcissist's return during collapse isn't an invitation to genuine reconciliation. It's a final test of whether the empath's boundaries are permanent or negotiable. When the narcissist returns at their lowest point, they're not asking if you'll help them heal. They're asking if you'll help them avoid healing one more time. There's another person the narcissist often turns to during collapse, someone who might not be immediately obvious, but who serves a very specific function in the narcissist's psychological survival system. This is what I call the enabler, who never required accountability. And understanding why the narcissist gravitates to this person reveals something crucial about what they're actually seeking in crisis. This person is typically someone who's been in the narcissist's life for a long time, often since childhood or adolescence. It might be a sibling who's always made excuses for them, a childhood friend who's witnessed years of problematic behavior but never confronted it, a cousin who maintains loyalty regardless of circumstances, or even a long-term friend who's consistently taken the narcissist's side in every conflict. What distinguishes this person from other people in the narcissist's life is a very specific relational pattern. They have never, at any point, required the narcissist to take responsibility for their behavior. They've never set firm boundaries. They've never withdrawn their support in response to harm. They've never said, "What you did was wrong, and I can't support you in this." Instead, this person has provided something the narcissist desperately needs, especially during collapse: unconditional validation, without the demand for change. Let me explain why this matters so much in the context of a narcissistic crisis. When the narcissist's world is falling apart, when they're facing consequences, when their reputation is damaged, when relationships have ended, when their carefully constructed image has shattered, they're in a state of profound vulnerability. And vulnerability for the narcissist is terrifying because it threatens to expose what they've spent their entire life defending against, the possibility that they are fundamentally flawed. Now, at this point, the narcissist has two options. They can use this crisis as an opportunity for genuine self-examination, which would require sitting with unbearable shame, acknowledging harm they've caused, and doing the difficult work of actual change. Or they can seek someone who will help them restore their defenses without having to face any of this discomfort. The enabler represents the second option. This is someone whose entire relational history with the narcissist has been built on a simple, unspoken agreement. I will accept your version of events. I will never require you to question yourself. I will provide comfort without demanding accountability. And in the narcissist's moment of crisis, this is exactly what they need, because the enabler offers immediate relief from the cognitive dissonance of collapse. When everything is falling apart and reality is intruding in ways the narcissist can no longer deny, the enabler provides a safe haven where the narcissist's defensive narrative can remain intact. Watch what happens when the narcissist arrives at the enabler's door. The enabler doesn't ask the hard questions. What was your part in this? How did your behavior contribute to this outcome? What patterns keep repeating in your life? Instead, the enabler immediately adopts the narcissist's framework. This is so unfair. People don't understand you. You didn't deserve this. The enabler might even help the narcissist construct elaborate justifications for what's happened. Your ex was too demanding. Your boss was threatened by your talent. People are jealous of you. You're too good for them anyway. Every one of these statements reinforces the narcissist's grandiosity while explaining away the collapse as something done to them, rather than something they created. This is profoundly different from what would happen if the narcissist went to someone with healthy boundaries. A healthy person, even one who cares deeply about the narcissist, would offer compassion alongside reality. I can see you're hurting, and I want to support you. And I also think this might be an opportunity to look at some patterns that keep causing you problems. But that kind of response, compassionate accountability, is exactly what the narcissist cannot tolerate during collapse. It would require them to sit with shame, to acknowledge fault, to consider that maybe their defenses and strategies haven't been working. The enabler spares them from all of this. And there's another crucial function the enabler serves. They provide validation for the narcissist's victimhood narrative. Because in the narcissist's collapse, they often present themselves as the victim of circumstances, of other people's failures, of bad luck or conspiracy or betrayal. And the enabler, because they've never challenged the narcissist's narrative before, immediately accepts this framing. You're right. It's everyone else's fault. You were treated terribly. You deserve so much better. The enabler might even become indignant on the narcissist's behalf, which further reinforces the narcissist's avoidance of personal responsibility. This creates a kind of psychological cocoon, a space where the narcissist can experience their collapse without having to actually face what caused it. They get to feel supported without having to change. They get to rebuild their defenses using the same faulty materials that led to the collapse in the first place. And here's what's particularly important to understand. The enabler isn't necessarily doing this from malice or even conscious choice. Often this person has their own reasons for maintaining this dynamic. Maybe they need to be needed. Maybe they've built their identity around being the loyal one, the understanding one, the person who never abandons anyone. Maybe they're conflict avoidant and have learned that challenging the narcissist leads to drama they'd rather avoid. Or perhaps, and this is common, the enabler has also been harmed by the narcissist, but has developed a coping strategy of minimizing, rationalizing, and explaining away that harm. To acknowledge that the narcissist is genuinely problematic would require the enabler to confront their own complicity, their own avoidance, their own acceptance of unacceptable treatment. So it's easier to maintain the narrative that the narcissist is fundamentally good but misunderstood. Whatever the enabler's motivation, the result is the same. The narcissist finds refuge with someone who won't require them to face themselves. And this refuge, while temporarily comforting, ultimately prevents the kind of crisis that might actually lead to transformation. Because genuine change usually requires hitting bottom without a soft landing, facing consequences without someone immediately rushing in to cushion them or reframe them. The enabler prevents this necessary discomfort. They help the narcissist avoid the full impact of their collapse, which means they help the narcissist avoid the motivation to genuinely change. And once the narcissist has restabilized with the enabler's help, they typically return to their life with the same patterns, the same defenses, the same behaviors that led to the collapse in the first place. The narcissist doesn't run to the enabler because they're the most important relationship. They run there because it's the only place where accountability will never be required. But there's another strategy the narcissist employs during collapse that's particularly revealing about how their pathology operates. And this, one might seem counterintuitive at first. Sometimes, instead of returning to familiar people from their past, the narcissist seeks out someone completely new, someone who knows nothing about their history, their patterns, their recent collapse. A fresh slate. And this isn't random. This is strategic in a way that even the narcissist might not consciously recognize. Because a new person offers something that no one from the narcissist's existing life can provide, the opportunity to construct an entirely different narrative about who they are and what's happening to them. Think about what the narcissist is facing during their collapse. Everyone who knows them has witnessed, to varying degrees, their behavior over time. They've seen the patterns, heard the stories, watched their relationships implode. Even the enabler, even the parent, even former supply sources. They all carry some awareness of the narcissist's history, some context that complicates the narcissist's ability to present themselves as purely victimized. But a new person? They're a blank canvas. They have no prior information, no context, no basis for questioning whatever narrative the narcissist chooses to present. And in the narcissist's collapsed state, this represents an extraordinary opportunity. So the narcissist might join a support group, a new social circle, an online community, or even pursue a romantic interest, all while presenting themselves as someone who's been profoundly wronged by circumstances or other people. They craft a victim narrative that's compelling precisely because the new person has no evidence to contradict it. My ex was abusive, and I finally had to leave. My family turned on me when I tried to set boundaries. I lost everything. Because I trusted the wrong people. I'm going through the hardest time of my life because people took advantage of my generosity. Notice what's happening in these narratives. The narcissist is describing a collapse. Things have fallen apart. Relationships have ended. There have been losses. But they're framing all of it as something that was done to them, not something that resulted from their own behavior. And the new person, having no other information, often accepts this framing at face value. Even more importantly, the new person often sees the narcissist as vulnerable, hurt, deserving of compassion and support. The narcissist appears humble in their crisis, seemingly open about their pain, apparently seeking genuine connection during a difficult time. All of this activates the new person's empathy, and if that new person happens to be an empath themselves, the hook goes especially deep. The narcissist begins to receive what they need: validation, attention, sympathy, support. But, unlike with people from their past, this supply comes without any accountability, without any requirement to acknowledge their role in their own collapse, without anyone questioning their version of events. And here's where it becomes particularly effective. The new person often feels special. They feel chosen to witness this person's vulnerability, trusted with their pain, given the opportunity to help someone during their darkest hour. There's an intimacy that forms quickly, what's sometimes called trauma bonding, or instant intimacy, where the narcissist shares deeply emotional material early in the relationship, creating a false sense of profound connection. I've never been able to talk to anyone the way I can talk to you. You understand me in ways no one else has. Meeting you right now feels like fate, like you were meant to help me through this. The new person hears these statements and feels significant, needed, special. They have no way of knowing that the narcissist has likely said similar things to many people before them. This strategy also serves another crucial function. It allows the narcissist to temporarily believe their own revised narrative. When you tell a story to someone who accepts it without question, who validates your victimhood, who agrees that you were wronged, it becomes easier to believe that story yourself. The new person becomes a mirror. that reflects back the version of reality the narcissist needs to maintain to avoid facing their own responsibility. And unlike the enabler from the narcissist's past who validates them out of habit or their own needs, the new person validates them from genuine belief. They're not making excuses for someone they know is problematic. They're supporting someone they perceive as genuinely victimized. This makes their validation feel more authentic, more credible, even to the narcissist themselves. There's also often a love-bombing component to this dynamic. The narcissist, in their collapsed and vulnerable state, may pursue this new person with unusual intensity. They express profound gratitude for the support they're receiving. They may quickly escalate the relationship, whether it's friendship or romance. They present this new person as their savior, the one who believed in them when no one else did, the one who saw their true worth. And all of this feels incredibly real to the new person. They experience themselves as genuinely helping someone in crisis, as being a force for good in someone's life during a difficult time. They have no context for recognizing that they're actually being used to help the narcissist avoid the very reckoning that their collapse should be prompting. What makes this particularly tragic is that the new person often has no warning signs to recognize. Unlike people who've known the narcissist for years and have seen the patterns, the new person only sees the current presentation, someone vulnerable, hurting, seeking support. By the time the narcissist has restabilized their defenses and the familiar patterns begin to emerge, the new person is already emotionally invested. And by then, the narcissist has constructed an entire relational framework based on this new person having saved them during their lowest point. The new person feels obligated, invested, responsible for this person's well-being in ways that make it difficult to recognize when the dynamic shifts from genuine support to exploitation. The narcissist seeks new supply during collapse, not despite having no shared history, but precisely because having no shared history means having no accountability for the past. There's yet another pattern that emerges during the narcissist collapse, one that reveals both their desperation and their unwavering commitment to avoiding genuine accountability. Sometimes the narcissist reaches back into their distant past, contacting people they discarded or devalued years earlier, approaching them with what appears to be humility and self-awareness. And this is particularly confusing for the person receiving this contact, because enough time has passed that memories may have softened, wounds may have partially healed, and the person might have told themselves they've moved on. Then suddenly, out of nowhere, the narcissist reappears with a message that seems thoughtful, reflective, even apologetic. I've been thinking about you lately. I realize I didn't treat you well when we were together. I was going through a difficult time and I took it out on you. I'm in a different place now, and I wanted to reach out and acknowledge that you deserved better. Or perhaps, I know it's been a long time, but you've been on my mind. I've done a lot of growing since we last spoke, and I can see now how I hurt you. I'd really like the chance to reconnect, if you're open to it. These messages are often carefully crafted to hit specific emotional notes. There's acknowledgement of past harm, though usually vague and non-specific. There's an implication of personal growth and change. There's a humble tone that suggests the narcissist has genuinely reflected and matured. And there's an invitation to reconnect that positions the recipient as having the power to grant or deny this opportunity. For the person receiving this, it can feel like vindication. Finally, the narcissist is admitting they were wrong. Finally, they're seeing what happened clearly. Finally, they're taking responsibility. This might feel like the closure that was never provided when the relationship ended, but what's actually happening is something quite different. The narcissist is testing whether time has done what it often does, eroded the sharp edges of memory, softened the resolve to maintain distance, created enough space that the person might be willing to give them another chance. Let me explain the psychology behind this. During their collapse, the narcissist has typically exhausted their current supply sources. Recent relationships have imploded. Current enablers may be depleted or unavailable. New people haven't yet provided the depth of supply the narcissist needs. So they begin mentally scrolling through their past, looking for potential sources they haven't tapped recently. And they're looking for specific characteristics in these former supply sources. Ideally, this is someone who once cared about them deeply, who provided high-quality supply, but who was discarded or pushed away before they could establish firm, permanent boundaries. Someone who left with hurt rather than anger, with sadness rather than complete. Closure. These are the people most likely to respond to an approach that seems reflective and apologetic. Because if someone left angry, if they achieved complete clarity about the narcissist's pathology, if they've done the work to fully heal and move on, they're unlikely to be receptive to reconnection. But if someone left confused, hurt, still holding on to some hope that the narcissist might one day recognize what they lost, they're vulnerable to this strategy. The narcissist is also betting on a few psychological phenomena they've observed over time. First, that people generally want to believe in the possibility of change. When someone appears to acknowledge their faults and claim growth, we're inclined to give them the benefit of the doubt, especially if we once cared about them. Second, that time creates a kind of selective amnesia. We tend to remember the good moments more vividly than the day-to-day erosion of our well-being. We might recall the connection we felt, the intimacy we shared, the potential we saw in the relationship, while the specific incidents of harm, manipulation, and devaluation blur into a general sense of it was complicated or we were both at fault. Third, that many people struggle with the idea that someone could be fundamentally unable or unwilling to change. We want to believe that everyone has the capacity for growth, that suffering leads to wisdom, that time and experience transform people. The narcissist exploits this optimism. So when the narcissist reaches out with apparent humility after years of silence, they're making a calculated gamble. Will this person's guard be down enough for readmission? Has enough time passed that they'll be willing to see if things could be different this time? And here's what makes this particularly insidious. The narcissist often begins the reconnection with appropriate boundaries and seemingly healthy behavior. They don't immediately return to the old patterns. They might remain respectful, thoughtful, apparently changed for a while. This initial phase serves as evidence that maybe they really have grown, maybe time really has transformed them. But what the former supply source doesn't realize is that they're being tested and evaluated. The narcissist is assessing how much supply can this person still provide? How firm are their boundaries? How much of my old behavior will they tolerate before pulling away again? Can I use this connection to stabilize myself during this collapse? If the person proves to be a viable supply source again, if they respond with empathy, if they're willing to offer support, if they show signs of still caring, the narcissist will gradually reintroduce the old patterns. The appropriate boundaries will slip. The seeming self-awareness will fade. The familiar dynamics will reemerge, often so gradually that the person doesn't recognize it's happening until they're once again deeply entangled. And if the person maintains firm boundaries or doesn't respond with the level of engagement the narcissist needs, they'll typically be discarded again, often with less care than the first time, because now the narcissist knows this source won't be useful during their crisis. What makes this recycling of old supply particularly damaging is that it gives people false hope. They believe they're seeing genuine change, genuine growth, genuine accountability. They open themselves to someone they once cared about, willing to believe that people can transform. And then they experience the same patterns all over again, often with an added layer of shame for having fallen for it a second time. The narcissist returns to old supply not because they've realized its value, but because they're testing whether your memory is shorter than your compassion. And now we arrive at perhaps the most disturbing and least understood response to narcissistic collapse, one that doesn't fit the pattern of seeking external supply at all. In the rarest but most dangerous scenarios, the narcissist doesn't run to another person. They turn inward, but not toward genuine self-reflection or healing. Instead, they spiral into self-destruction that itself becomes a form of supply and manipulation. Let me be very clear about what I'm describing here, because it's crucial to distinguish this from actual suicidal ideation or genuine mental health crisis. What I'm talking about is when the narcissist collapse manifests as dramatic, visible, self-destructive behavior that functions primarily to attract attention, generate concern, and compel others to provide rescue. This might look like substance abuse that's performed publicly, social media posts about drinking alone, messages sent while intoxicated, that reveal how much they're suffering, visible deterioration that others cannot help but notice. Or it might be reckless behavior, dangerous driving, financial self-sabotage, professional self-destruction, all carried out in ways that ensure others become aware of it. Or, in the most alarming cases, it involves threats or gestures of self-harm that are carefully calibrated to be discovered or interrupted, not actual suicide attempts, though the line can be dangerously thin, but performances of suicidal ideation designed to activate the rescue impulse in others. And I want to be extremely careful here, because I'm not suggesting that we should dismiss or minimize anyone's expressions of suicidal thinking. When someone indicates they're considering harming themselves, that should always be taken seriously, and appropriate professional intervention should be sought. But we also need to understand that for some narcissists, the performance of self-distract action becomes another manipulation tool, one that's particularly effective because it weaponizes others' legitimate concern for their well-being. Here's the psychology behind this pattern. The narcissist in collapse has typically exhausted their usual supply sources. They've run to the parent who couldn't provide what they needed, approached the ex who maintained their boundaries, sought out the enabler who may finally be depleted, tried to find new supply, but found it insufficient. They're facing a moment where external validation isn't readily available through their typical channels. But they've learned something over their lifetime. Victimhood is a powerful form of supply. Being seen as suffering, as struggling, as on the brink. This generates intense attention and concern from others. It positions them at the center of everyone's worry and care. It transforms them from the person who caused harm to the person who needs help. So the self-destruction becomes performative. It's real enough to be concerning, visible enough to generate response, but controlled enough that it functions primarily to compel rescue. The narcissist is essentially saying, through their behavior, look how badly I'm doing. Look how much I'm suffering. Look what's happening to me. Someone needs to save me. And this is extraordinarily effective at bypassing people's boundaries. Because when someone appears to be in genuine danger, when they seem to be spiraling towards serious harm, the people who care about them feel compelled to intervene, even if they'd previously established firm boundaries, even if they'd committed to no contact, even if they'd recognized the relationship was harmful. The narcissist's self-destruction creates a crisis that others feel morally obligated to respond to. And in responding, in reaching out to check on them, in expressing concern, in offering support, those people become sources of supply again. The narcissist is once again at the center of attention, once again the focus of others' emotional energy, once again important enough to worry about. There's also often an element of revenge in this pattern. The self-destruction is frequently most visible to people who've set boundaries with the narcissist. The ex who left, the friend who pulled away, the family member who stopped enabling. The implicit message is, look what you've done to me. Look what your boundaries have caused. My suffering is your fault. This generates guilt in people who might otherwise feel clear about their decision to distance themselves. They begin to question whether they were too harsh, whether they abandoned someone who genuinely needed them, whether they're somehow responsible for the narcissist's deterioration. And this guilt often pulls them back into engagement, back into providing support, back into the dynamic they'd worked so hard to escape. The self-destruction also functions to rewrite the narrative of the collapse. Instead of the narcissist being accountable for the consequences of their behavior, the relationships they destroyed, the trust they violated, the harm they caused, the story becomes about their suffering, their crisis, their desperate need for help. They transform from perpetrator to victim, from someone who caused harm to someone who's been harmed by life's cruelty. And people who witness this transformation often feel compelled to respond with compassion, because we're trained culturally and psychologically to help people in crisis. We believe that someone who's suffering deserves support, regardless of what they might have done previously. The immediate crisis supersedes the historical context. But here's what's crucial to understand. Responding to this performance of self-destruction usually doesn't help the narcissist Al. In fact, it often reinforces the pattern. Because if self-destruction successfully generates supply, if it brings people running who had previously established boundaries, If it restores the narcissist to the center of others' attention and concern, then it becomes a strategy that works. It becomes something the narcissist will repeat when their usual supply sources dry up. This is one of the most difficult aspects of narcissistic pathology to witness, because it places observers in an impossible bind. How do you maintain boundaries with someone who appears to be self-destructing? How do you protect yourself from manipulation while also responding appropriately to what might be genuine crisis? The answer, unfortunately, isn't simple. It requires recognizing that you can be concerned about someone's well-being while also maintaining that their well-being isn't your responsibility. You can ensure that appropriate professional help is available to them, contacting emergency services if there's genuine danger, encouraging professional intervention, while refusing to personally provide the supply and rescue they're seeking, because the pattern of turning self-destruction into supply cannot be interrupted by providing more supply. It can only be interrupted by the narcissist facing the reality that their crisis, their suffering, their collapse will not compel others to abandon their boundaries or return to harmful dynamics. When the narcissist turns their collapse into performance, they're making their final gamble, that your compassion for their suffering outweighs your commitment to your own well-being.